I want to talk about a particular phenomenon that it can be seen from multiple perspectives and multiple dimensions. The short of the issue is that there seems to be a certain sensation or a trend, because we're living in a time of instantaneous forms of gratification, instantaneous forms of information, that this has been translated, and there's some truth to this as well, but we'll see soon that it has to be taken within a context, that there is this idea of attaining some type of higher conscious or a type of spiritual epiphany or awareness or breakthrough without actually processes. Now again, there is some truth to this, and this has to be balanced, and it's delicate between process and presence, which is something that was discussed in the past in a full book of this idea. But let's see how this is related to a particular issue in terms of spiritual practice. And this also has underpinnings, different types of psychological processes and mental processes, where a person is struggling with din, to use more language of Sod. A person is struggling with din, with judgment, with constriction. They're judging in their place of their Malchus, in their place of their presence of who they are in this immediate moment. They feel stuck. They feel that there is opaqueness, there is concealment, there is darkness, and they cannot get out of this situation. And what they wish to do, and whether this is financially, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, doesn't really matter. They're all part of the same idea, that there's a level of lack of flow and lack of openness and lots of expansiveness. So what they wish to do is what is called hamtakas adin, to sweeten the judgment. And how do you do hamtakas adin? How do you sweeten the judgment? So the sweetening of judgment is like, it's explained by the Arizal, based on the Zohar. We'll see soon that the hamtakas adin is b'sharsham, to sweeten judgment. You have to do it in its source. The source of din is in Binah, which is translated means to understanding. So you draw from the world of Malchus and you connect it to the world of Binah. So what is Binah? To use another analogy, which the Zohar and Parshas Terumah connects to the two Svarim, the two books that it speaks about in the beginning of Sefer Yetzirah. So it is sort of my perfect book, the book where everyone has his Olam Haba, his world to come, his Gan Eden. The Olam Habina, the world of Binah is connected to Gan Eden. That's a place of my perfection, my wholeness, where things are working 100% at all levels of self, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and transcendentally, in all levels of my being. I'm in this perfect state. And what you're trying to do is connect that wholeness, that perfection, that inner tzaddik that you have, to the part of you that is still struggling, is still in a place of judgment, is still in a place of constriction. So to connect your being as is with your state of who you truly are on the deepest level. So to connect your Malchus to your Binah. That's the idea of hamtakas adin. This concept of drawing these two realities together can also be translated more on a theological, philosophical construct as well, which is that if Malchus, which is presence in this immediacy of the creation, is the place of Atzmos, the place of the essence of the Creator is expressed, the Atzmos HaNelam, the essence of the hidden Creator is expressed in the immediacy of the physicality. So then, I don't need the entire Seder Shtalshalos. I don't need the entire unfolding of this evolution from the infinite light until it becomes condensed into finitude, but I can just have Atzmas itself. And this is also dangerous. So let's try to understand this first with what it says in the Zohar, and then try to understand this a little bit more practically, what exactly this means, and how this is relevant to life today, in this present reality that we're living today, and especially where people are trying all different types of methods and techniques, especially people that are spiritual seekers or people that are stuck psychologically or mentally or emotionally. They're trying to leapfrog programs or leapfrog the process to get to a place where they feel whole again. In the Zohar, in the Raya Mihemna, which is a part of the Zohar, one of the parts of the Zohar, the faithful shepherd, which is parts of Zohar within the Zohar itself, in Chukos, in last week's Parsha, the Zohar talks about a Parah Aduma. It talks about the Red Heifer, and explains that the Parah Aduma, that the Parah is the 280 sparks connected to the Mansapach, the 5 final letters in the Hebrew, in the Aleph Beis, which represents the endings of things. That's the Hey Gvuras, that's the Hey constrictions, because if you have Mansapach, if you have these final Mem, final Nun, etc., they create the endings of letters, endings of words. So theoretically, if you have a stream of 50 or 100, 1,000 letters, and you don't have any of the Mansapach, any of the final Mem, Nun, Tzadik, Pechav, in that structure, all the letters can be read as one word. You put in the Mansabach, that creates the division, that's the end. Because when you have a final pay, for example, that's the end of a word. In English, you don't have this parallel to this, but in Hebrew, you have the Mansabach. So that represents the 5 Gvuras, and total number of value, the numeric value of the Mansabach is 280. So the Pa represents the Gvuras, the Parah Aduma, and the Hey is the 5 potentials, connected to the 5 Mansabach, 5 potentials of the mouth as well, which differentiates and conceals and contextualizes sound. Sound is koil, which is undifferentiated, which is flow, versus the idea of dibur, which is constriction. So the Parah Aduma represents gevura, represents constriction, place of gevura. Tamima, says the Zohar, that it's complete. Tamim represents the idea of chesed, as we find with Avram Avinu. His halacha fane b'haya tamim, that Avram is considered the midah of chesed, of fullness, of wholeness. And Hashem Bamum refers to Mesita da Muda de Metziusa, then, which doesn't have any blemish, refers to Tiferes. And that nothing was rested upon this, the animal, the Red Heifer. This refers to the Shechina Ilah, the higher Shechina, which is the higher Malchus, which is Binah, which is the place of freedom. The Lo Yishalta Les Rishus L'Sita Achar L'Shalta, there's no other side. There is no Satan, there is no negative forces, there's no constricting forces, there's no angel of death. And the process of the Parah Aduma is to draw down from the Malchus, the Gvuras of Malchus, the place where there's constriction, from the Shechina Tata, which is the lower presence of the Shechina, to draw it up to the higher Shechina. This is the language of the Zohar. In the Zohar Parshas Terumah, which we spoke about it in the Shir and Sefer Yitzir, the Zohar Parshas Terumah says the same thing. It says that there is a place of mizois. Mi represents, mi is the hidden, the mystery, the wonder. The place of Binah, the 50 gates of Binah. Zois is this, which is the Malchus. So there's Binah and the Malchus. And the one that was able to draw down Binah to Malchus, which is also representative of the 2 wives of Rachel and Leah. That Rachel represents the revealed, the Alma de Iskai, the revealed world, which is being seen. Leah represents the hidden. And there is Rakes, is Yoin, this means that she represents Alma de Iskai, the hidden world. So Yaakov, who is Tiferes, who is in the middle, therefore he gives birth to the Yud Gimel Gvulei Alachsan, to the 6 Midas in its fullness, which is the idea of the 12 tribes. So Yaakov, who's in the Midah of Tiferes, the attribute of Tiferes, is able to draw down from Binah to Malchus, from Leah to Rachel, to be married to both of those. And that is, that's the Kina Soif and Tar B'Chachma. Rachel wants to be like Leah, that's the Sefer and the Sefer. Says the Zohar, that if we're trying to draw down from Binah to Malchus, from this state of perfection, so to speak, the prototype of the place where there is no Satan, there is no Malchus, there is no angel of death, there is no temptation. It's a place of freedom, the world of freedom, a place of perfection, of wholeness. If you're trying to draw down from that place into the place of your Malchus, into the Sois, but you don't have the midah of Tiferes, you don't have the middle aspect, which is Tiferes, which the Zohar again says also Chukos. So the Zohar has a very stark language, and the Zohar says, then you're Megal Arois. It's Gila Arois. It's revealing of nakedness. This is like drawing down two it's impossible to draw down together, to make a union between these two. It's like adultery or Arois. What does this mean? This means that there is a yichud, a type of unification that is a wholesome unification, a unification that's done correctly, parallel to that in terms of, let's say, a person's marriage. So there's a healthy relationship, and a healthy relationship produces life, produces the furthering of life, produces children, produces proper qualities and proper shefa in this world, proper flow in this world. And then there's sometimes a relationship when you're drawing down from the ima, the mother, which is representative of Binah, and you're drawing down together with Malchus, which is the place of the daughter. It's Gila Arois. Gila Arois is like the Tzemach Tzedek explains in the mitzvah Gila Arois, Gila Arois in Dachim Tzesacha, that there are some type of relationships, and that's why the Torah says ki chasadu. There's some types of relationships that are so intense that we don't have the vessels to receive this type of light. And in fact, when you draw down this type of relationship in a practical way, in a physical way, what you're actually doing is you're bringing the greatest darkness into this world. And it's the biggest of abomination, the most terrible thing, a repulsive thing that could be done. And what is that? That is the idea of when you are drawing or connecting Binah to Malchus without the attribute of Tiferes, which is the place of the midas, the place of the process, the place of unfolding. One more piece here. This is from the Alter Rebbe in Parshas Chukos. In the Parsha of Chukos, in the Mimer, that the Alter Rebbe talks about the snake. That if we're bitten by the snake, so the Torah says that you should place a snake of the Choshes. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu put, a copper snake. And if when a person is bit by the snake, they should look at the snake, which is some type of therapeutic way of looking at the darkness or the thing that hurt you itself, or looking at the poison itself, and through that you bring healing. And Alter Rebbe explains in the Maimer that if the intention is like the Mishnah says in the end of Bracha, and the end of Rosh Hashanah, if the intention is that a person should look upwards when a person feels dark, nachash, and bitten by the snake is obviously on a physical level, but also a metaphorical level. And the snake represents all the places of temptation and false imagery and the place of fantasy, everything that the snake represents in the Torah. That when a person is stuck in the snake reality, what a person has to do is they feel bitten by the snake, they have to look upwards and understand and to draw and to understand that the snake itself is really there only to draw out something deeper within you. These temptations that you have, the Alter brings the mashal of the Zoina, that there's a prostitute that's hired, that the king has a son, a child, and the king wants to draw out stronger potentials within the child to show the child, that they're greater than they think they are, and to make them greater than they think they are, to reveal that greatness with who they are. So the king hires a prostitute and says to go and seduce the child. Now the intention of the prostitute, the intention of the king is not, God forbid, for the child to be seduced, but it's the opposite, for the child to push aside this temptation. And deeper yet, in the deeper awareness, is to recognize that this adversary or this temptation is in fact a shliach, a messenger of the king itself. Like the famous mashal of the Baal Shem Tov that he brings down, from the Toldos brings down, this rebellion, where the king sends one of his messengers to create a rebellion, and the highest level of the kingdom, the highest level of people, the most evolved group of people, is the ones that say that you actually work for the king. So that's the recognition that those temptations, those hardships, those darkness that you're struggling with is only there to draw out some greater light. And the more you recognize that and you draw it out, and the more you recognize that the things that you're going through, the hardships that you're going through, or the darkness that you're experiencing, is only the king masked in multiple levels of astar, multiple levels of concealments. So you should draw out and recognize that the king is also present there in those temptations itself. The moment you do that, you draw down from your Malchus to the place of Binah. You draw down to its root, which is B'sharshai, Antaxadin B'sharshai, and then in the place of the Ayin, which is even higher, the level of Chachma, you could draw down even new blessings. But then at the end of the Maimer, in the parentheses, Tzaddik, he writes like this, that Shemitaka Gvuras Koshes the Nechashim V'Asafim, that the truth is that the sweetening of the real hard judgments and constrictions that a person is going through, the snakes and the scorpions, which is really harsh. The Nechashim V'Asafim, these fiery snakes. This is through the Nachash Chaishas. This is through this copper snake. Shu Tiferes the Klippas Noiged Atzilus. This is through Tiferes, again, the middle attribute of Tiferes, which is representative of the six midos of Tiferes, of Klippas the Atzilus. To elevate through that, not to circumvent, not to not look at those problems, not to say that there are no issues and there is no darkness, but through looking upwards to recognize that these klippas, these negative forces that you're experiencing, this darkness that you're experiencing, that comes, like the origin comes from Ma'alamatayim, it comes from the higher level of light. Through that you draw out the goodness with this, and then then through that you draw and you connect the Tiferes of the Klippas Noiga to the Tiferes of Kedusha, which means that there is something, there is our perfection, our wholeness of who we are on the deepest level. On the level of Mashbi Moisei Tzadik, the level that we're sworn, we're given an oath, and like the Tzemach Tzadik writes, Mashbi Moisei Tzadik means that we're severe, we're satiated with the idea of the inner Tzadik within ourselves, which is our perfection. That's the place of Ein Mabin, the place of Cheres, the place of freedom. And then there's a place of Malchus, which is the state that we're in. And then there's this whole middle space, which is Tiferes, but it's the place of our emotions, which represents all the things in life that we're going through. So there's reality as it is, and there's a perfection of its potential, or of its prototype. There's our prototype, and then there's a life as we're existing, and then there's all this in between, all this processes in between that we're going through. What the Maimer is saying, what the Zohar is saying, what Tzaddik is saying, and what all Terumah Kabbalah says, all the teachings of Kabbalah and the teachings of Chassidus is saying, is that there are two truths, and they're simultaneously true, and we have to learn how to hold this tension, both experientially, certainly in our minds somehow, and most importantly experientially. There's the truth that we are. There's the Nekudah, the part of ourselves, that Amach Kulam Tzadikim, that the place of our wholeness, or the place of our future, the place of our past and the place of our future, and the place that's beyond the past and the future. There's a place of the tzaddik, there's a place that we're perfect, and there's a place that's a place of yechida, that's a place of the highest level of the soul, that's a place of Mashiach, that's a place of redemption, that's the redemptive consciousness, that's the place that everything is already whole in this present moment, drawing from the past and the future in the present. And then there's a place in the process where we're constantly struggling, and a person is dealing with hardships, whether it's hardships in parnasa, livelihood, or issues with nachas with his children. These are external issues, but how about internally? You're struggling with your own emotions, and you have to overcome your anger. You're having anger issues, or you're being judgmental, or you're a little lax in performing a certain mitzvahs, or you can't focus, and you're trying to learn all these things. Or you're trying to daven, you're trying to pray, and your mind is wandering. These are all klippas. These are all things that are the experiences of life, like the tachtonim, like the language of the Alter Rebbe. Paragraph of in chapter 36 in Tanya. That's the place that we're struggling in. So what does a person do? So there are two ways how to do this. One is Gila Arayis, and one is the correct way. One way to do this is, and again, that's also related to the conversation about if it's essence, so why do we need to say there's Shtalshalos? Why do we need the process of the evolution of the Ein Sof? If a person's struggling, and when a person's struggling, and just the trauma of existence, just being alive, and I want to feel something higher, I want to feel something connected, I want to feel my wholeness. So there's two ways how to do this. One is a way, let me leapfrog the entire system. Let me push aside the whole Tiferes element, the element that holds the tension between the upper and the lower, or builds the bridge, better yet, that builds the bridge between the upper and the lower part of myself, into the higher part and the lower part of myself, into the more internal part, or the external part, if you wish. Let me dismiss that bridge. Let me let go of that, and let me try to have transcendental or peak experiences that will allow me to have access to that place of Alma L'Cher, the place of the freedom. But I don't want to do. I don't want to have Tiferes. Tiferes is both process and also law. Tiferes is Matan Torah. Tiferes, Parshas Brachos, is Matan Torah, the idea of Torah, which is law, which is civility, which is ethics and spiritual law. I want to do away with that. I want to have ecstatic experiences that will push me out of my Malchus, push me out of the humdrum, the pedestrian life that I'm living, and give me some type of uplift, to have some type of spiritual experience. But I don't want it to come with the whole Tiferes in the middle, with this whole process. I don't want it to have law and structure and order and linear thinking. I don't want to have that whole structure. I would rather just go straight into the top, straight upwards, and have those peak experiences. And what the Zohar is saying very clearly, very starkly in Parshas Terumah, and then in Parshas Chukos, and then it's all over. This is the whole meta trope in the Zohar Kodesh and in Torah Chassidus, is that's Gila Arayis. That's trying to bring down such intense lights that it's just chaos. It just creates more chaos, and it's unsustainable. And you're gonna fall. You're going to, because you never work things through. The only correct way to have these experiences is through the midah of Tiferes. You need the midah of Yaakov. That Yaakov's Tiferes is Torah. It is law and practice and assimilation and integration. That's also a word for Tiferes, in order to draw these two realities together. And that's the only healthy way to do this. The only healthy way to do this in a correct way, that's not Chas V'Shalom Gila Arayis, but it's a way that allows for the birth of new and the creation of new self. And to emerge into the new is, we have to remember that we need this middle process. And the super high level, this is all connected with the idea of Atzmos, which is that everything's already here, and yet we long. And I've spoken about this many times, that the greater the awareness of the presence already of Mashiach, of the future in the present moment, actually create even greater longing in the place of that absence. Because no matter how much we grasp, there's always more to grasp. Because the path to infinity is infinite. And every time we think we understand something, and every time we think we grasp for something, there's actually more into that. There's more in that process. And that recognition that there's always more, allows us to grow, and allows us to be in the place of Tiferes. It allows us to be in this in-between space, where there's the place of the being state and the becoming state, and the place where we're in the movement and in the process of evolving, where we can connect our perfect self, our whole self, the place of Mashiach, the place of the nitzvahs of the spark of Mashiach. the place of the future and the past in the present moment, and yet work through all of time and all the processes in order to get there. And that's the only way we can have really integrated and holy experiences that can really have an effect on us, and not, God forbid, create tremendous trauma and tremendous terrible effects because people don't know how to assimilate these experiences. They don't have a Torah, they don't have a law and a spiritual law or spiritual wisdom to understand how this process works, and it ends up being just an experience that maybe feels good for a few minutes, but ultimately brings a lot of havoc and destruction. Have a wonderful day.